The evening before the wedding was meant to be a time of celebration, but inside the bridal room, panic simmered beneath the surface. Alina, the elder sister, was the one chosen to marry Zaydin Khan, a self-made billionaire whose name alone commanded respect. The union had been arranged by their parents to secure the family's future and strengthen business ties. Everyone believed Alina was ready. Everyone except Alina herself. Unknown to her family, she had been secretly in love with someone else for years, a struggling musician with no money, no status, and no acceptance in their traditional household. On the night before the wedding, she confessed the truth to her younger sister, Mahira, in a trembling whisper. She couldn't go through with it. She would rather run away than marry a stranger, no matter how wealthy or powerful he was. Mahira was stunned. Their father had nearly gone bankrupt the previous year, and this marriage was meant to secure financial stability for the entire family. Backing out would not just bring shame, it would destroy their father's last business partnership and tarnish the family name beyond repair. Guests were already arriving, the media had been alerted, and the groom's side had spared no expense. Calling it off would be a disaster. As Alina wept, begging her not to reveal her secret, Mahira's mind raced. She had always been the quiet, responsible one, the one who cleaned up after other people's messes, the one who cared too much to let things fall apart. She knew their father's fragile health and pride wouldn't survive the blow. And though the idea sounded insane, there was only one way to avoid catastrophe. She offered to take her sister's place. Alina resisted at first, horrified. But as the reality of the consequences grew undeniable, silence fell between them like a verdict. Mahira wasn't doing it for love, or wealth, or even dreams, she was doing it to protect everyone but herself. They shared the same build, the same dark eyes, and the traditional wedding veil would conceal her identity. Only a handful of people had seen the bride's face before the ceremony, and their relatives were too overwhelmed with arrangements to notice a switch. With shaking hands, Alina removed her intricate bridal jewelry and placed it onto Mahira, piece by piece, like passing down a fate. By dawn, the decision had been sealed with whispered tears and silent promises. Mahira, dressed as a bride meant for someone else, stepped into the role not as a sister, but as a sacrifice. She didn't know the man waiting for her at the altar. She didn't know his heart, his temperament, or his intentions, but she knew one thing, she had to carry this secret to save the family, no matter the cost. The wedding hall shimmered with gold and soft lights, alive with music, flowers, laughter, and 1,000 eyes that believed everything was perfect. Mahira's heart pounded beneath the heavy bridal attire, her steps slow and deliberate as she walked down the aisle in her sister's place. Every jingle of her jewelry felt like a reminder of the lie she was stepping into. She kept her eyes lowered, the bridal veil hiding most of her face. The only comfort she had was that no one seemed to suspect anything. She recognized her relatives, the distant cousins, the family friends, but none of them looked closely enough to notice the switch. They were too enchanted by the grandeur of the event and the prestige of the groom's family. And then she saw him. Zaydin Khan. Tall, composed, and impossibly charismatic even in silence, he stood with his eyes fixed on her as she approached. His expression was unreadable, calm but observant, confident but not arrogant. It was the first time Mahira had seen him up close, and something about the quiet intensity in his gaze sent a shiver through her. She didn't know if he would recognize that she wasn't the woman he had been introduced to weeks before. She didn't even know how much he had spoken to Alina, if at all. When she reached him, he stepped forward and offered his hand. For a moment, she hesitated. Was her hand shaking? Could he feel her fear? But he didn't react. If he sensed anything wrong, he didn't show it. With the ceremonial rituals beginning, there was no room for doubt, no space for retreat. What had started as desperation had now become reality. The wedding vows were exchanged under a canopy of flowers and tradition. She repeated each word carefully, afraid her voice might crack. Every time she spoke, she expected someone to stand up and shout, "That isn't her." But no one did. When the groom placed the ring on her finger, her breath caught. It was elegant, perfect, and completely wrong. It wasn't meant for her. Yet in that moment, there was no turning back. The sacred ties of marriage were officially binding her to a man she didn't know, under a name that wasn't truly hers. At the reception that followed, she remained quiet, speaking only when spoken to, careful with every word. Xaden stayed near but didn't pry. His politeness made it both easier and harder. He treated her with respect, unaware that the woman beside him was a carefully kept secret. The world celebrated their union. Only she knew the truth. She had just married a stranger, and the real test had only begun. After the wedding, Mahira was driven to Xaden Khan's estate, an architectural marvel of glass, stone, and silence. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress of success, guarded by men in suits and surrounded by manicured gardens. Yet, despite the intimidating aura of luxury, the atmosphere inside was surprisingly calm. No arrogance. No coldness. Only quiet control. Xaden didn't overwhelm her with questions or forced conversation. He guided her inside with a dignified nod, his voice low and steady as he told the staff to give her space and privacy. Even in silence, he carried authority, like a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be respected. Mahira had expected a groom like him to be stern, demanding, maybe even dismissive. Instead, he showed a quiet, unexpected gentleness. He noticed she was nervous but didn't push. He didn't touch her unnecessarily, didn't overwhelm her with expectations. He simply told her she could rest for the night and that they would talk in the morning. But she couldn't rest. As she lay in the grand bedroom with silk sheets and chandeliers above her, the weight of her stolen identity pressed on her chest. What if he discovered the truth? What if her parents slipped up? What if someone compared her to Alina someday? Every breath felt like a countdown. The next morning, she expected a barrage of personal questions. Instead, Xaden surprised her. At breakfast, he spoke to her the way a man speaks to someone he intends to understand, not own. "I don't expect you to adjust instantly," he said without looking up from his coffee. "Take your time. You don't have to pretend to be anything you're not." Those words nearly broke her. She wanted to ask, "What if everything you believe about me is already a lie?" But she bit her tongue. She had promised herself that she would carry this burden until she either found the courage to confess, or the world unraveled the truth on its own. Over the next few days, she began to see different shades of him. He was passionate about his work. His billion-dollar empire didn't come from inheritance but from grit. People listened when he spoke, not because of fear but respect. He was sharp with those who lied, yet just with those who were honest. And though he rarely smiled, there were rare moments when a soft warmth flickered in his eyes, like embers beneath steel. Mahira didn't know whether to fear him or admire him. He was a stranger. But not the monster she had imagined. Perhaps that was what made it even more dangerous. The days that followed were a maze of silence, stolen glances, and unspoken truths. Mahira moved carefully through her new life, measured words, soft footsteps, lowered eyes. Every interaction was a performance, every breath a reminder that one slip could destroy everything. Xaden, on the other hand, was observant in ways that made her uneasy. He didn't pry, but he noticed. He noticed when she hesitated before answering a question about her past. He noticed that she preferred the quiet corners of the house instead of the luxurious lounge areas. He noticed that she never asked about his wealth or status, something most people couldn't resist doing. She had become a puzzle to him, and though he didn't confront her, he was quietly studying her with the same sharpness he used in boardrooms. One afternoon, his aunt, who had met Alina briefly during the engagement, paid a surprise visit. Mahira's heart nearly stopped when the woman smiled and said, "You seem quieter than before, but maybe marriage has softened you." Xaden glanced at Mahira then, curiosity flickering, but he said nothing. The relief was temporary, but the fear lingered. At night, when the world went still, guilt came to life inside her. She remembered her father's strained smile, her mother's relief, and Alina's tearful silence. She had stepped into this marriage to save them, yet the lie she carried was becoming heavier with every passing day. What unsettled her even more was the change happening inside her. Xaden was not cruel or careless. In his intensity, there was restraint. In his authority, there was respect. He asked if she was comfortable in the house. He noticed when she skipped meals and made sure she ate. Once, when she cut her finger in the kitchen, he appeared without being called, as if drawn by instinct before the staff even reacted. She found herself waiting for his presence, listening for his footsteps in the hallway, catching her breath when he entered the room. Attraction was the one thing she hadn't prepared for. It crept in quietly, disguised as gratitude, wrapped in the warmth of accidental moments. Still, she reminded herself, he doesn't know who you are. Every smile she returned, every conversation she allowed, felt like betrayal disguised as bonding. Sometimes, she thought about revealing the truth just to free herself from the mounting tension. But then she imagined the fallout, the rage, the humiliation, the consequences for her family, and the words died in her throat. There was only one path now: live the lie. Or wait for it to explode. Secrets don't stay buried forever. Mahira knew that, but she prayed for time to figure out a way to survive the truth. But fate has a habit of moving faster than courage. It happened on an evening when the world outside was quiet, but the storm inside finally cracked open. Xaden had returned early from a meeting, his expression sharper than usual. He entered her room without warning, holding his phone in his hand, his gaze unreadable. On the screen was a photo, Alina at an event, smiling beside him from one of the engagement gatherings. The woman in the photo was not the woman standing before him now. Mahira's breath left her body. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just looked at her, not with fury, but with a chilling, controlled intensity. The kind that comes from a man who has been blindsided yet refuses to react without understanding the entire truth. "Who are you?" His voice was low, almost calm. That scared her more than if he had shouted. She could have lied again. She could have pretended confusion. But something inside her finally broke, the weight of the lie, the stolen identity, the quiet kindness he had shown her despite not knowing who she truly was. Her eyes filled. Her hands trembled. And before she could think, the truth spilled out, about Alina, the runaway love, the pressure on their family, the disgrace they were trying to avoid. She admitted that she wasn't forced, but she also hadn't been chosen. She had stepped into the fire because no one else would. She expected anger. Betrayal. Rage sharp enough to burn everything down. Instead, there was silence. Xaden didn't move. He didn't accuse. He didn't call for anyone. He just watched her, not as a liar, not as an intruder, but as a woman shaking under the weight of sacrifice and fear. "You married me," he finally said, eyes fixed on hers, "knowing I was a stranger. And you carried this alone, knowing what would happen if I found out." There was no mockery in his tone. No cruelty. Only a shocking understanding that unnerved her more than fury would have. She couldn't bring herself to speak again. She could only wait for the verdict. After what felt like years in a single minute, he turned slightly, his jaw tense but his voice steady. "I don't forgive lies," he said quietly. "But I don't overlook courage either." Her heartbeat stopped. Then he added, almost reluctantly, "You should know something, Mahira. I never wanted to marry your sister in the first place." Her eyes lifted in disbelief. "I agreed because it was expected. But the woman I ended up with," he paused, searching her face. "She's not the one I thought I didn't want." In that moment, her fear didn't vanish. But it was no longer alone.